Welcome to Smarter, Richer, Braver, the podcast that's especially curated for a generation of young people who want to step up, stand out, and live life on their own terms. A generation who aim to do better, not just for themselves, but for humanity as a whole. A generation who aim to be smarter, richer, and braver, because that's exactly what the world today needs. I'm your host, Marilyn Pinto, author and founder at KFI Global, and I'd like to warmly welcome all you Gen Zers. A special shout out to all our KFI Global students listening in. Please know that this podcast was made with you in mind, and I promise it's going to be worth your attention.
This podcast is strictly for those 25 years and younger. If you are older than that, please listen at your own risk. Common side effects include regret and anger for not having heard this earlier in your life.
Today, we are discussing some strange people in your life. Their love for you is unconditional, but their expectations of you seem astronomical. Their taste in music makes you want to take a long nap. Their fashion sense is so dated, and their dance moves are just plain embarrassing. They love you, but they also drive you up the wall. They care for you, but that can sometimes feel suffocating. You love them and appreciate them, but oftentimes you just don't get them. Today, we're discussing parents. Dr. Shefali is here to help us wade through this emotion-laden topic. A clinical psychologist and an expert in family dynamics, she's been on Oprah 7 times and has written 3 New York Times best-selling books. She usually helps grown-ups navigate the parenting minefield, but today we've asked her to flip the script and talk to you about how best to deal with the strange people in your life, your parents. So join us on this episode as she busts some myths you might have about your parents, takes you through the complexities of dealing with parental expectations, parental conflict, and so much more. I know that her insights and advice will help you understand your parents better, build a stronger connection with them, and guide you to leading a more meaningful life, one that's smarter, richer, and braver. Dr. Shefali, welcome. We are so honored to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Young listeners have a host of topics they'd like your advice on, so I'm going to dive right in, if that's okay.
Sure.
In your book, The Awakened Family, you talked about some common parenting myths. For the sake of our young audience, I'd like you to explore this from a teenager's perspective. What are some misconceptions or myths that teenagers may commonly have about their parents?
That they should be perfect, the same way that parents have it for their children, teenagers have it for their kids, for their parents. Just like parents have the myth that their children should be perfect. On some level, we kids have that expectation of our parents. And what we don't realize as children, and especially as we grow older, is how unconscious our parents are. We begin to get glimpses of it in our teens. That's why we reject them. But it's true, our parents are unconscious because of context, social times, who they were when they were children, how their parents were. Forgive our parents because of all that they didn't know and because that they were deeply trapped by their own childhood and they were stuck in their own patterns. So yes, we were victims of our parents' conditioning, but our parents were victims of their parents' conditioning. Like, stop expecting them to be superhuman. Stop expecting them to be psychic. They don't know how we feel. And many times we expect our parents to just know how we feel. Don't be afraid of going against your parents if you feel stifled or claustrophobic. It's okay to disappoint your parents. Just like I tell parents, it's okay if your kids disappoint you. It's okay if you let them down. Your parents will survive. What's important is you live your own life as well.
That's a great message. All right. There was an article in the newspaper recently that described parenting as a sense of powerlessness, a lack of control, and a lack of self. And it struck me that this might actually be exactly what our kids feel. I'd like your perspective on that.
Yeah, both sides in the dynamic feel the same way. But the thing is, because our children are encaged due to their helplessness when they are young, we parents have a greater onus to wake up, which is why I put the greater burden on the parent, which is why I do conscious parenting. But I also tell after the age of 21, and then after the age of 25, and then definitely after the age of 30, you are responsible for your own destiny and you have to release your parents from being your parents. You have to take charge of your own life. You have to hold your own reins to your own destiny. How much can you blame your parents? You're right. We validate you. But at some point, you need to take the reins of your own life and move forward and stop being limited by your parents' limitations.
Teens have an evolving dynamic with their parents, and we know that this can be quite tumultuous at times. What do you think is the one thing that's important for these youngsters to know about their parents to help them understand their parents better?
Well, just that their parents are trying their best. Every parent tries their best within the limits of their own understanding. And their job is not to fix you. Yet their job is not to make you happy. You have to do that for yourself. And your parents will make bad choices for you. So just because your parents make a choice for you doesn't mean it's the right choice. You have to take ownership at some point of your own choices, especially after the age of 30. So don't get married till the age of 30, even if they're forcing you, because then you're going to blame them. And that choice is hard to get out of. Don't have children just because they tell you to have children, because that is a long choice, hard to get out of. The big choice is you wait till you can make your own choices. But we want to wait on these decisions, right? Till we
That
have
makes
a break.
sense. Yes,
And
and that segues beautifully into our next topic, the murky waters of family disagreements, where parents and teens often find themselves swimming. It's almost a rite of passage, isn't it? But how can these youngsters navigate this conflict in a way that's not just respectful, but also effective in getting their point across?
so every parent, child, and every couple really will have disagreements. It's supposed to be that way. We're not identical carbon copies of each other. So what's hard though for children to understand is that parents will pull the parent card and parents will pull the money card. Parents will pull the house card. It's my house, it's my money, it's my sacrifice. And those are manipulative technique that parents use on children. And children need to learn that these are manipulations. And it's okay for parents to be rejected. It's okay to reject your parents, because what you're doing is not rejecting your parents, you're rejecting their manipulation and their control. And that's not fair. Parents manipulate children a lot. And we parents need to stop doing that. That's what I teach parents. But children need to realize that they're being manipulated. And many children don't realize that they're being manipulated.
Now, I realize that some of these kids are already pros at this. What do you suggest youngsters do to negotiate with their parents on important issues?
The children don't believe that they're going to be heard. So every time my daughter yells at, but the question is not why you're yelling. They are yelling because they think they're not going to be heard. So I ask children to realize that the reason you're yelling or the reason you're screaming or you're rejecting your parents is because you don't feel heard, you don't feel safe, you don't feel validated. So instead of doing that, tell your parents, I don't feel heard, I don't feel understood, I don't feel like my needs are being met. And your parents will be shocked at your level of maturity because they're not that mature. But maybe you can get your needs met through a counselor or through a friend. It's very hard to deal with parents and very easy to say that we should deal with them. Parents are the hardest creatures in the world to deal with. So if you're having parental conflict and parental hardship, you're not alone. Parents are so defensive, they're so in their ego. Tell your parents you're trying to manipulate me and watch the wrath that comes from them. Parents don't want to look in the mirror. Beg your parents to give you a therapist, because if they are unreachable, at least you can get your needs met through a therapist.
This podcast isn't meant to entertain you. It's meant to help you do life better by showing you how to think about and navigate important issues that aren't usually talked about to youngsters. But we believe that you need to hear this because it has the potential to change your life and the lives of other young people like you. So please share this episode with someone you care about, and if you haven't already, please hit the follow button. It helps us get these meaningful insights and messages in front of more youngsters.
All right, here's a topic that hits close to home for many of our listeners: overprotective parents. We all know that parents mean well, but sometimes their desire to keep their kids safe and can hinder the kids' personal growth and independence. How can these teenagers effectively communicate their need for freedom without igniting a full-blown conflict?
Well, children and teenagers deserve autonomy. Parents don't want to give it to them because they're scared of what will happen in the future. So teenagers need to understand that the reason why parents control them is because parents are so anxious. It's not personal, but it feels personal and it's not fair because it claustrophobically suffocates you. So the best way to do it is try to talk to your parents or get a mediator, get an uncle or aunt to mediate. So do what you need to do. Don't get into trouble though. And here's the thing I would like to tell kids: don't be so rebellious to ruin your life to teach your parents a lesson. They're not going to learn from you. So stop trying to bang your head on the wall, trying to get their attention. You are empowered to create your own life. Don't be miserable sitting around because your parents are not woken up. Your parents may never wake up. It's not their job to wake up, it's for you to wake yourself up. Your parents just provide a launch pad, but you have to fly. And if they don't give you that launch pad, you can give it to yourself. You know how many adults I know that didn't have supportive parents, but they still launched. So stop being a victim of your parents' unconsciousness. You can have your whole life ahead of you to make your own success. You don't need to be caged by your parents.
All right. But I'd like to talk about some types of dysfunctional parenting, whether it's substance abuse, narcissism, emotional detachment, or any other type that you think would be helpful for our listeners to identify. What are the red flags and signs they should be wary of? And is there any way to protect themselves and create a healthier family environment?
Well, they need to be aware that they may be eating away their troubles and pushing down their voice. They may be getting anxious. Their procrastination is a sign of anxiety and depression. They may be staying in bed too late. They may be turning to drugs and alcohol, risky behavior, sexual promiscuity. If this sounds like you, go get help. Because again, you will be ruining your life for no reason. If you're thinking of suicidal thoughts, if you're thinking of harming yourself, it's not worth it. Your parents are not worth it. I feel so bad to say this, but that's the way you have to break free. Stop feeling obligated to live according to your parents' fantasy of you. You get to reject other people's fantasies of you, and you get to create your own fantasies.
Witnessing constant fighting between parents can be distressing for teenagers. How can they cope with the emotional impact of this while also avoid being pulled into the conflict?
Well, they need to avoid being pulled into the conflict. Tell yourself, if you're a kid going through this, that it's not your business. You're not your parents' therapist. You're not your parents' fixers. You're not your parents' saviors. Your parents are a mess. Laugh at them, learn from them, and release them from perfection. Your parents are not perfect.
You keep coming back to that. That's a nice one. Teenagers being raised by a single parent often face different dynamics, higher stress levels, and more responsibilities compared to those in dual parent households. Can you talk a bit about how these youngsters can better cope with this?
Well, the sooner your parents move on to other people and other relationships, if they're in the midst of a fight with the original parent, the better for you because you want a happy parent. Many times kids don't like the parents with other people,
Yes.
but it's actually to their advantage that their parent is happier. Don't be afraid of change. Don't be afraid of your parents moving on. It doesn't mean they don't love you. It just means that they are trying to find love for themselves and happiness for themselves. If you have a single parent, admire that parent. That parent is doing everything for you, is honoring you, is managing everything for you. Respect that parent. Forgive them. Have compassion for them. And have compassion for yourself. It's okay to be challenged. It's okay not to have a perfect family. Don't fall under the victim mentality that why did this happen to me?
Yeah.
Why is only my family so messed up? Every family has crap, big crap, and you'll be shocked. You just don't know it. It just looks rosy on the outside.
It's amazing. The one thing parents and teens argue about the most is being on social media, right? Can you talk to our listeners directly about why this freaks parents out? Are parents justified in their fear? And what advice can you give these youngsters about using social media?
Yes, social media is not good for your brain. It's the worst thing that has happened to you as a teenager. You don't realize it. Your parents are justified. It is the worst thing that has happened to society because it has taken you away from your real contacts, from leaving the house. More of you are less dating than ever before. More of you are less adventurous, athletic than ever before. More of you are suicidal than ever before. This is directly linked to the rise of social media because you compare yourself more online. You're more isolated. You're having virtual relationships, not real relationships. And all of this has an effect on your brain development.
That's a message they won't like to hear, but it's really important for them to hear. Thank you for that. I recently saw an ad that you were advertising for a parent reboot camp, right? This is for parents who had problems with their teens, like lying, disrespect, screen addiction, tantrums. If you were to design a reboot camp for teens, what problems with parents would you include?
Well, I teach parents all the time, right? That they have to lower their expectations, embrace imperfection, allow their children to live their own destiny, talk to their children, connect with their children, not yell at their children. These are the essentials for both sides of the equation.
Makes sense. All right. Knowing what you know now, if you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Don't be afraid to live your own life. It is your own life. Your parents will be old, maybe they'll pass away. Don't waste your time and energy trying to make them happy. They should be happy with you no matter what. And if they're not, that's their problem. Try to live your own life with respect, but don't be afraid.
The next question is one from me. Or like all of these questions were topics that the kids wanted to, but the next one is from me. Your daughter Maya is 20 around?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Right. Does she ever quote you to you when she feels you're not being enough of a conscious parent?
Yes, all the time.
Okay.
Mom, you're being a hypocrite. And, oh, that's how conscious you are. If every time I yell, she's like, oh, look at the conscious parent. She's very, very quick to point out my flaws, which is good. It's a good
Yeah.
thing. That's an honest relationship. I don't feel disrespected. My ego doesn't like it, but I know that it's good for me to wake up. So I need somebody to challenge me, and I like it. I like it. My ego doesn't like it.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, Dr. Shefali, being mindful of your time, I just want to say thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for all these amazing insights. And I'm so grateful to you for giving us your time. Thank you for the work that you do in the world. And I know our listeners are going to benefit so much from this conversation. We do hope to welcome you back someday.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. I want to help you use what you learned here. And the best way to do that is to get a podcast buddy. That's someone who also listens to this podcast. Then talk to your podcast buddy about the one takeaway from this episode that resonated with you the most. That's it. That's all you have to do. Remember that much of what is talked about on this podcast is stuff that's not typically talked about to young people. And it should be. It's stuff that you need to know so that you can lead a life that's, you guessed it, smarter, richer, and braver. This is your host, Marilyn Pinto, signing off until next time.
If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to broach in our upcoming episodes, please email us at smarterricherbraver@gmail.com. And if you'd like to sign up for one of our award-winning programs, go to kfi.global and check out our upcoming schedule.